Hello, and welcome to this MCMA webinar. How will OPC UA and TSN technologies change the automation industry? My name is Joanna Keel, and I am the Manager of Marketing and Membership for the MCMA, and I'll be serving as your moderator today. Attendees that have joined this webinar have joined in listen-only mode, which means that you are muted. If you do have a question during this webinar, please feel free to submit them in the questions panel of your webinar screen, and we will answer all questions at the end of this webinar. And as a reminder, this webinar will be recorded and a link will be sent to you within the next 24 hours. And now, I'd like to introduce the presenters for today's webinar, Sari Germanos and Sebastian Sexe. Sari Germanos is a Technology Marketing Manager for B&R Industrial Automation. His expertise lies in developing complex, distributed, real-time mechatronic applications. He also has significant experience in applying simulation technologies to improve efficiency of developing large-scale distributed systems. Sari received his master's in computer science from Boston College. And Sebastian, together with the global team, is responsible for the technology marketing of open automation technologies at B&R. In this context, he's representing B&R in organizations such as the IIC, OPC Foundation, and the VDMA. Throughout the last 11 years, he's held several positions in the automation business and gathered experience as a support engineer, promoter for industrial solutions, and technology manager. And of course, I'd like to thank our exclusive sponsor of today's webinar, B&R Industrial Automation. B&R combines state-of-the-art technology with advanced engineering to provide customers in various industries with complete solutions for machine automation, motion control, HMI, and integrated safety technology. With real-time Ethernet standards like PowerLink and Open Safety, as well as the powerful Automation Studio software development environment, B&R is constantly redefining the future of automation engineering. And now with that, I'd like to hand it over to Sari and Sebastian to begin today's presentation.
All right, Joanna, thanks a lot for this very nice introduction. As you can see now on the screen, we're going to walk you roughly through 3 different topics in today's webinar. We'll start with the industrial IoT, the current state. What is state of the art in our industry today, and where are we going within our industry? Before we go into the ongoing development for machine interoperability, so in how far we can achieve a real plug and produce scenario in our production sites, before we go into shaping the future and get the forecast and outlook and perspective, where all this is going and what architectures will be possible in the future. But let me at this point start with industrial IoT, the current state. As you might be familiar with, in today's time, the challenge that all of our companies, whether you are an end customer, a machine builder, or product manufacturers, are facing is the challenge of connectivity and connecting systems to one and another. The industrial Internet of Things is all about connecting things, allowing them to send, receive data in between each other, and also to analyze this data, and based on this information, then produce the added value and, for example, generate new business models based on that. When we dive a little bit deeper into what industrial IoT means, it, on the first hand, does connect things to each other. It sends us data directly from a machine, from a line, from a plant, from a device. So to sense this kind of information, it's important that we have the respective hardware that we can install, and it gives us access to all the data points that we find inside the machines or on the plant or line level. Then in the next step, what we do is we collect all the data. So we aggregate it, we pull it together in a centralized point in a database and make it accessible to go to the next step and put some powerful software on top of all the collected data and information. And what this software in most cases does, it analyzes this data and tries to, for example, identify inefficiencies. As soon as this has happened, it's the next step, which is quite logical, is of course we want to reduce such inefficiencies as example, and that's where we start to control. So industrial IoT is not just about pumping up data to some cloud, but it's also about getting access back to the process and optimize processes or redefine processes. So basically, to sum it all up, when we talk about industrial IoT, we see 4 major steps, which are connect everything, collect the data, analyze based on that data, and then act accordingly to our processes. What is important to see when we talk about industrial IoT is that it is not a topic which is started by some German initiative such as Industry 4.0, or it's not an American-only thing with Industrial Internet Consortium, or something coming from China, like Made in China 2025. No, it's a global topic. Of course, there are some local initiatives, but they are all targeting the same thing, because they are all facing the same issue. If we dive into this issue some more, what we can see in today's production sites is that the data volume and the generated data is increasing continuously. So you see it ramping up tremendously. But the data that we have available to analyze and get information and adopt our processes accordingly is still at a very, very low end, because we just don't have access to it. We don't have it connected yet. And the gap in between the generated data and the analyzed data, that's where actually we can generate new revenue streams. That's where we can save money by increasing the efficiency in production processes and so on. And that's what we're targeting. We want to give more access to data to have the possibility to analyze it. If we dive some more into today's production processes and investigate where this big gap actually comes from in between generated data and accessible data, what we see is that in production sites, we have a totally fragmented setup. So that's what you see here in the typical, I'll say, old school pyramid, where, for example, inside machines, you have protocols like Sercos, PowerLink, or EtherCAT that run inside the machine some processes. Then on a line level, sometimes you have CC-Link IE, you have Profinet, you have Ethernet IP, and then at a certain point, if you want to connect to an MES or ERP system, you will find OPC UA. So basically what we see in the market today is a fragmented market which is based on proprietary technologies. So we are all talking different languages and don't understand each other. But now the new challenge is that we want to interconnect everything, which is basically harmed by this diverse setup of protocols that we find in the field. So when we try to connect, we bump into several issues. We see that right at the point where we want to connect, we either got to put gateways, which costs a lot of money. We need experts that can diagnose both communication protocols, for example, which also cost money. So we invest a lot of money into something which doesn't actually really bring us a benefit. So now let's dive a little bit more into the world, the way it will look in the future and some of the new challenges. So what we clearly see is that in production sites, as the one that you can see on the screen, we have different things that we now all of a sudden want to connect. We have machines, we have drilling machines, CNC machines, injection molding machines that have to be connected one to another in a production line. In between those machines, for example, we might have a handling, some kind of robotic or any other kinematic that we can find in the field. And to sense or start some minor processes, we also might have sensors and actuators which are directly in the production process. Now, the new challenge that we have is that we don't just run those systems independently, but we want to connect them to the cloud. That's where we actually, the cloud as very abstract model, where we find all of a sudden new players for the automation and for the OT industry, such as Cisco or Amazon Web Services or Microsoft. And we want to bring the data and information all the way from the machine up to the cloud. It can be an on-premise private cloud. It can also be a cloud which is hosted in some data center. So here we have full flexibility where to put this data. But what is now happening is that the amount of data increases tremendously because all of a sudden everything is connected. So we must find a way how to structure this humongous amount of data and how to harmonize the language in between the individual systems. And that's actually where we are pushing strongly forward to have one common standard, which is called OPC UA. That actually makes the communication language for industrial IoT applications in our perspective. What was important when we first moved into the direction of OPC UA was that it's industrial feasible. So it was always perfectly feasible for if you, for example, want to connect a machine to the cloud. It was also feasible if you want to connect the handling or sensor actors to the cloud, and that worked very well. As soon as you wanted to have inner machine connectivity and synchronized processes in your production sites, that's where there was a gap in the application that we could fulfill with OPC UA so far. And that's why already 1.5 years back, the initiative on time-sensitive networking was started to make OPC UA deterministic and cyclic as communication. And having OPC UA together with time-sensitive networking, we now see that it can cover 100% of the applications that we find in any kind of industrial environment in production, for example. I tried to picture this a little bit more, and what you see here is actually how the existing protocols exchange information. All you will see on a wire, if a machine communicates to a handling system, are zeros and ones. And that's the more data you get, the more confusing it gets. And that's why we need to put some structure over it, which is OPC UA. And diving some more into this technology, it's an open and international standard. That was important when we said we want to move in this direction, because open stands for that the technology is accessible at any time to everybody at the same level. And that's what we found actually in OPC UA. In addition, it delivers information instead of plain data. So instead of zeros and ones, it all of a sudden provides more information around the data. Take the example, from inside your machine, you get a temperature value. You just pump this temperature value up to the cloud, and then in the cloud, you don't know what 5, for example, means. So what is required to have to get this information to the cloud, it's important to have information models, and that's what OPC UA delivers. So it doesn't just send 5 as value up to the cloud, but it sends 5 is a temperature value in degree Fahrenheit or Celsius, and it has some border values that it shouldn't exceed, and that all that information is provided by OPC UA, for example. In addition, the technology as itself, it's not something that is just now emerging. It has been around quite some time. And by now, it is in a status where actually the global end customers community, such as Exxon, have seen the big potential by the technology and are already requesting their suppliers to integrate OPC UA in their products, whether it's a PLC or a machine or whatever. They all have to provide an OPC UA connectivity possibility. What is important when we talk about the production of tomorrow is that we want to have a high flexibility. We want to reconfigure lines very quickly. We want to switch from product A to product B, single production. So, and to be able to do this, we want to eliminate manual work while switching from product A to product B as much as possible. And that's why plug and produce plays a major role when we talk about industrial IoT communication. And that is also guaranteed by OPC UA and the functionality that it brings along with it. And now the next point is important to understand when you are a machine builder and basically you want to have the free choice of components. You want to pick a PLC from Siemens, another PLC, for example, from B&R, from Rockwell or whatever. what is important for you as machine builder, that they are all able to communicate among each other. And today, we can already say that OPC UA offers the largest ecosystem available in the market. It is implemented in all the PLCs that are just now mentioned. For example, another product is a bus coupler for I/O connectivity that is provided by B&R, which has a OPC UA server integrated. So you see, you find a lot of components that already have the technology implemented. Another big challenge that we're facing when we talk about industrial IoT is that we're connecting everything together. Now, all of a sudden, everybody can see everything. But actually, that's not what we want. We want to say only the people who should have access to the data are also granted access to the data, and nobody else can suck it up from some site place or something like this. So what OPC UA as technology brings along is an integrated security concept, and that's something that we can just use out of the box. So basically, the plug and produce principle, when you take a look at a typical factory where you have multiple machines connected to each other, also means that we have to integrate, based on OPC UA, of course, the industry or machine-specific companion specifications, such as Euromap or PACML, that allow a plug and produce functionality on the line level that we see right here. And then we have some edge node installation, which can control the whole thing and supervise when parts of the line come back, when they are exchanged, and so on. If you want to connect then up to the cloud, also here the technology offers the possibility. When you say you connect a plant or a site to the cloud, you automatically send your data across a internet connection that might drop off at a certain point of time or might get cut for a minute or so. What you don't want to happen is that the data that you want to transmit just gets lost because the connection is not there right now. And that's actually where AMQP or MQTT come in. The Q in both technology names stands for queuing mechanisms. That means that if, for example, in your edge node that is connected via an internet connection to your cloud, the internet connection gets lost. Automatically, the data is stored on the edge node and with correct timestamping and everything is sent as soon as connection to the cloud is back again. So you don't lose any data, but you have everything available whenever necessary, and then you can do long-term storage and stuff like this in the cloud system. And that's where I want to hand over to Sari, who will give a quick introduction to the vertical standards that are just now mentioned, such as PACML. Sari?
Thank you, Sebastian. So let's kind of continue along the same theme of machine interoperability. If you take a look at the way Microsoft sees the IoT world today, when it comes to industrial Internet of Things, the architecture that they propose looks something like this, where they see data coming from a bunch of assets. And each one of these assets contains an OPC server. So in this case, an asset could be a machine, or it could be a collection of machines like a production line. This data is then collected through OPC UA clients into an area where that data is aggregated and analyzed to some degree, or at least compressed in some form, and then finally sent over to the cloud. And that is where you can, once the data is in the cloud, then you can start aggregating it some more. You can start doing some analysis, and you can start improving your business intelligence based on the data that you're collecting. So that's just one view if you look at the world from the Microsoft perspective. So let's go into a typical packaging line example. And here I'm only using packaging because in the packaging world, it is quite common for a production line to be made out of several machines. In this case, this is a picture of a bottling system. But these machines are highly specialized, and they're usually made by different OEMs. So one machine might be made by an OEM who is using Allen Bradley PLCs. Another machine can be using Siemens. A third machine could be using B&R. Yet the challenge on the production floor is to get those machines to connect with each other and interoperate so that you can manage the production in a seamless fashion. In order to do that work, production lines are typically built by system integrators. So the end user who is responsible for the factory will then hire some system integrators to come in and do the commissioning and the integration. And that ends up being quite a lot of work. I mean, typically, you hear numbers like 60% of the work done by the system integrator is mostly figuring out how to get those machines to connect and talk to each other. And so every time you build a production line or every time you modify the production line, you lose a lot of time just in the machine-to-machine integration. So along those lines, there is a standard called TR88, which is an ISA standard. In the packaging world, it is also called as PACML. The purpose of the standard is to define from the outside view what a machine looks like. So it defines a set of states so that every machine has the same template based on these states. And that way you identify some definitions for some common terminology so that when a machine is running or a machine is halting, it means the same thing as you go from one machine to the next. So by using this standard, then when system integrators are trying to integrate two machines with each other and they're reading the code in the Rockwell machine where it's using RS Logics, and then they're reading the code inside the Siemens machine, which is using Step 7, at least they know what to look for. They know they can look at the state machine that is being presented and know this is the point where you do the product handoff, and this is the point where you can block a queue and restart a queue, etc. So PACML defines a series of modes for every machine, and each mode has a set of state machines that is associated with that mode. So in this case, a running mode will look something like this, where you have an execute state, you have a starting state, you have a holding state, held, etc. So if two machines now are going to be communicating, you need to make sure that they communicate when they're in the appropriate states. And then they also need to report the appropriate exceptions as the exceptions happen during the production process. So when you have a system like this, it becomes very modular, and then two machines look the same, and it's easier for system integrators to go off and do this integration. So primarily, the people who benefit from this are the end users, but there's actually benefits across the board. So the real business benefits comes from the fact that, first of all, you're using a standard ISA TR88. And even though it is used heavily in the packaging industry, this standard actually applies to pretty much any machine. There's nothing here that's unique about packaging. And there are some significant end user benefits. There are some system integrator benefits. There are some OEM benefits. And finally, you also have a very nice benefit of your system being modular. So if we take a look at the end user benefits, the connectivity between the machines becomes vendor agnostic. You're using a vendor agnostic standard, so the machines all look alike. It becomes much easier to manage your pipeline, and you can point problems in your pipeline as your production is taking place. Because all the machines have the same look and feel, and they have the same state templates, it becomes very easy to train your operators on the production line how to control a production line, because all the machines on the line pretty much have the same set of states. So it's very easy for the operator then to know when they see a certain state, what does that state mean? And so certainly there's significant benefits from the end user From the system integrator's perspective, instead of spending 60% of a project, 60% of their time just doing this basic integration, we find that this number drops down to about 20%. And that gives the system integrator the opportunity to add more value to the production line rather than just focusing mostly on the connectivity, all the interconnect mechanisms between the machines. And then it also gives the SI the opportunity to learn a new skill and actually provide training services to the end users and to other people who might need it. From the machine builder perspective, if a machine builder has not used PACML and is not familiar with the TR88 standard, there's a little bit of a learning curve because you have to understand what the states are and you have to know what is the appropriate behavior that is allowed in a machine. And when you are in a certain state, you can only react to certain events. So you have to learn that standard. But once you do it, at the end of the day, it ends up reducing your engineering costs significantly. It makes it easier to document what your machine does and how it works. And you end up with shorter machine lead times, faster commissioning, and at the end of the day, you will get paid sooner by your end user. So here's just an example of an analysis that was done by the ARC advisory group, and you'll see basically that there's improvements across the board from reliability or flexibility, productivity, and even down to inventory control becomes much better when everything is based on these common standards. So at the end of the day, now you end up with a production line where you have a bunch of machines all running PACML, all talking to each other, and that ends up being a nice setup. But now the question is, how do those machines actually communicate? So how do two PACML entities actually talk to each other? Today, the standard is just to use UDP packets. So if you have some data, as Sebastian illustrated earlier, a bunch of zeros and ones, those bunches of zeros and ones have to be aggregated into an Ethernet frame and then shipped over to the next machine. And the machine needs to understand, how did you aggregate that data? What do those zeros and ones really mean? And then how do I extract that data? So there's still a significant amount of work that has to be done in terms of packing your data and then unpacking it at the other end. There needs to be a common language. And again, because in the interest of reducing integration time and making the integration more seamless, OMAC, which is the organization that sponsors PACML, started working with the OPC Foundation, and they decided that instead of communicating with inter-machine communication, instead of using UDP packets, they want to have something that's a little bit more useful, and therefore they decided to use OPC UA. So OPC UA then would become an information model that allows two PACML entities to talk to each other. So based on that, a bunch of companies got together, and we have formed a working group that I'm currently chairing. And the purpose here is to develop a companion specification, an OPC UA companion specification for TR88. So all these companies got together, and we've started, this effort started about a year ago, and the companion specification now is almost complete. We use two primary consultants for this work. One consultant comes for BR&L Consulting, Dennis Brandl, who is a TR88 expert. And then we also use a consultant from DS Interoperability, a gentleman by the name of Paul Hunker. So those two guys are doing most of the heavy lifting, and then the other people from the different companies are on the phone all the time, just providing feedback, reading the spec that's being developed, and using their own experiences to provide input. Now, in order to hire these consultants and coordinate their work and managing their work, these are the companies that decided to work together to actually generate the funds to pay for this work. So, so this is probably one of the few times when you'll see competitors like Siemens and Bosch and B&R and Mitsubishi and Beckhoff, etc., all working together and pulling together to come up with this common specification. Now, in 2016, last year, at PAC Expo, we decided to show a demo at the OMAC booth to highlight what does this interoperability actually look like. So in this demo, we used a series of machines. These were all simulated machines. So it's basically a PLC with an HMI from each vendor. And each machine, each PLCs had a simulation of a machine, and those machines had to interoperate. And in addition, we generated an HMI that was developed by Copa Data. And from the HMI that they had, you could control each one of these machines, and you can see the PAC states, that you can see the state template on each one. So from that HMI, you could see that all the machines actually look the same, even though each one of them has a different program that's running and it has a different application. But from the interface perspective, all those machines have the same common template, and you can see the state changes happening in front of you. And you can also control the states. So basically, there was a control panel for each one of the machines, as shown here. And then you could also take a look at the state machine of each one of those. So this demo illustrated that it is now very easy to build a production line, and then very easy to control it because everyone's using a common template. This year at PAC Expo 2017, we will have another demonstration that's going to be much larger. In this case, you will see 9 machines hooked up together. So in addition to the 4 companies that are shown here, you will also see machines from Beckhoff, from Mitsubishi, from Lenza, from LTI. From all of these guys will actually be working together, and you will see a production line that is 9 machines long, all speaking PAC-ML and all simulating a production line. So if you have the opportunity to come to PAC Expo this year, please come by the OMAC booth and take a look at that demo. So with that, I will now hand it back to Sebastian, who can talk a little bit about what the future looks like.
All right, thanks, Ari. After this introduction of what especially the PAC-ML can achieve, which is very, very impressive, I think everybody has a good understanding that this is a very big thing that is happening in the means of standardization. And of course, in the means of standardization means that all companies have to work together. As Ari said, companies that were very competitive in the past, and still are, but in different areas, not in the communication area, are now all of a sudden working together. Take the big examples from the automation industry, whether it's Mitsubishi, so the Asian market, European companies such as Bosch Rexroth, B&R, Schneider Electric, and so on, or even Rockwell Automation that is engaging from the American side in the OPC UA activities and contributing to standardization, to harmonization, and 100% interoperability. What is also important when we see the big picture and what all has already been achieved and where we are going, it's the IT world that is getting much closer to the OT world, as we always read it from the news. So of course, IT companies have to contribute, and we have to exchange on a regular basis, for example, with Microsoft or Cisco, IBM, SAP, and see how we can build solutions together. And as said, also there, the communication is the first step. We first have to understand what the other guy is talking about when they talk about data and information. That was so far not a well-known word in the automation environment. And when we talk cycle times and very jitter and so on, that's something that the IT world has not considered the same way as the OT world. To bring all those companies together in the different working groups, B&R, and exchange with those companies, we have positioned inside the different organizations that you see now here on the screen. such as the OPC Foundation. Of course, that's a foundation where the standard OPC UA communication comes from. The information models are being standardized and so on. And that's where we drive the standardization work forward. In addition, the usability has to be better than what is existing today and has to be standardized as well. So to take an example, when you want to program a PLC, you don't always want to start from scratch. You want to reuse, independent from which PLC you program something for, you want to reuse software. And that's what PLC Open stands for. So in your PLC application, you can just pull in a standardized function block to, for example, access via OPC UA client to an OPC UA server. And this function block looks exactly the same with its parameters and outputs, for example, on any PLC. That's what PLC Open stands for, and that's where we're investigating strongly together with all the others in the market. Of course, as Sari mentioned, I call them vertical standards for those on the machine level or in the OPC UA wording, they're called companion specifications, the PACML or EuroMap. That's also where standardization work is driven forward. What is also very interesting to consider is work in the IEEE. As mentioned in the beginning, what is important is that it's an open standard, which is accessible at any time by any company. And accessible in this term means that, for example, TSN is implemented in any kind of chip that you buy from the market. That's what we're targeting by putting all the standardization work into the IEEE. TSN is 100% IEEE based standard. So the probability is very high that in 5 to 10 years, TSN will be implemented in any kind of chip that you buy off the market. If you want to compare it to something, it's just as CAN, which is by now a little bit older, I would say. TSN is 100% IEEE Ethernet standard based and will be implemented in any kind of chipset. What was also important when we moved forward was to guarantee interoperability. That's the highest value that we can actually generate at this level for the customers. Interoperability, so any component talks to components from other suppliers. And that's why we moved into the Industrial Internet Consortium, which actually guarantees or tries to guarantee interoperability. Going a little bit into the past, because those activities have all been going on for quite some time. Of course, what is important that all those companies talk to each other and really put to public. Our target is OPC UA TSN as unified standard. And that has happened, for example, at the SPS show in 2016, where high-level management representatives from each of the named companies were on stage during a press conference and said, OPC UA TSN is our core strategy for the future, for future applications, for industrial IoT applications. And we will bring products based on that technology, the combination of both. They all already have OPC UA in their products, and as soon as TSN is in the chips, they will have this on board as well. So a unified standard that can connect anything to the cloud. Of course, public work, and if you present something, somebody also has to do the work in the background, and that's done actually in the IIC. What you see here is the actual picture of the setup inside the IIC. What you see here is, as example, a KUKA robot, which is very similar to the handling system that I mentioned earlier. You have Bosch Rexroth PLC, a motion controller in this case, also integrated in OPC UA TSN network. This can be a full-blown machine. You have a BNR PLC with drives also integrated, also connected via OPC UA TSN, might be another machine. As emphasized earlier, you might have the requirement to connect sensors or some actuators directly to IOs on the line level. Here you see an IO block, which is directly connected via OPC UA TSN. And we said we also have to bring in IT companies into this game. So IT and OT convergence, and that's what is to be seen in the middle, where you have big IT players like Cisco, or in the industry especially known Belden Hirschmann, that actually bring in the switches that support TSN technology. If you go up to the cloud and you can pump all this data up to the cloud, where GE with its Predict solution also plays a crucial role. So summing up, this whole testbed represents a typical production line. You have different machines, you have handling, you have IOs directly connected, you have a vision inspection system from National Instruments, and all connected to one network, talking the same language, exchanging data in a time-synchronized cyclic manner, and giving total access up from the cloud to the devices, but also the vice versa. Of course, this is just a PowerPoint slide. I also want to show you what it looks in real life when we present the technology on a fair. That's what you see here. So it looks very nice. You have a lot of LEDs blinking. You have the technology running in the big circle in the middle and connecting all the different PLCs to each other with the same language. What we said in the beginning is that we want to wrap up the overall presentation with some typical applications that we already find in the field, and where we have brought the technologies that were introduced during the presentations now already. They've been brought to real applications, which of course, as soon as TSN, for example, is available, they will be extended some more. Take the example what you see here. A lot of machine builders or end customers have installed base spread all around the world. Of course, they also want to benefit with this installed base from the advantages that industrial IoT brings along, and want to connect this installed base to the cloud and analyze the data with it. Here we see a typical example from the food and beverage industry and an architecture on the right-hand side, where basically a existing machine, so an installed machine somewhere in the world, was connected via standard IOs to get the data off the machine. It was aggregated in a localized PLC, panel PLC that you see here, and then via OPC UA MQTT brought up to the cloud, where then actually it was the operational effectiveness, the OEE values were presented, and where it was identified where we would have in the production process inefficiency that we could get rid of. And also in addition to that, it was possible to introduce a life cycle management system of all the machines that in addition can be brought back via a dashboard to the end customer, who can then see actually the life cycle of his machine. Another application, totally different industry, is coming from the maritime industry, where a fleet management was required. What is interesting is that the functionality and the system setup and architecture look alike. So you have data points somewhere on that ship that are aggregated in this time in a PLC, and many of those PLCs are thereafter collected in a localized on-the-ship PC that connects directly to the cloud whenever the ship, for example, is in the harbor and has internet connection. It can transmit all the data which so far has been stored on the ship all the way up to the cloud, where thereafter it's possible to on the one hand side, optimize the end user experience. So as you can see in this example, it's also possible to gather information on, for example, how the operator of such a machine, in this situation a ship, can be tracked. How does operate the ship? And then based on this information, you can think about possibilities how to increase the end user experience that he has while operating the ship. So also added value that is brought by such an industrial IoT architecture. Another example comes from automotive production plant, where you have robots, as most of you know, that produce cars fully automatically. After what we do in this application, we measure vibrations of those robots, and based on those vibrations, we can tell when we have to maintain the robots. if vibrations of the joints of the robot exceed, for example, a certain value and a certain limit, the mechanical flexibility of the overall structure increases to a level where it actually could harm the product, the car, which is being produced. And that's why in this scenario, predictive maintenance has been introduced. So before actually the mechanical flexibility of the robot increases to a level where it harms the product, we can jump in, for example, on a Sunday shift and either exchange the whole robot or maintain the robot as necessary. Of course, if you want to break that down to values, then what you increase is the overall product quality and the quantity that you can produce, because you have, on the one hand side, no failures on the product themselves, and also you have planned standstill times during maintenance time. Last but not least, what is also important, especially if you have to monitor a machine park that is distributed worldwide, is that you actually can access the installed base that you have or the newly shipped machines from remote. So you can save a highly trained engineer to sit 11 hours on the plane to quickly commission a machine which is shipped to India or somewhere else. What you want to do is you want to do this remotely and save the time on the plane. And that's the example that you can see here. With dedicated possibilities, you have a PLC installed in the machine, and next to it, you have a site manager, as the component is called, which directly allows you to have a secure connection to a cloud. And inside the cloud, you have a gate manager that actually allows you, with your engineering tool, to directly access machines that are installed somewhere in the world, and you can, by that, directly diagnose or commission machines worldwide. Having that said, I hope that we could give you a good introduction to the standardization work that is being done, the importance, why open standards are the future, and many of the companies are investing so much time to implement and to move those standards forward, and that you also take away that it's not something that is happening sometime in the future, it's happening right now. And that's, I think, the point where I hand over to Joanna, right?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you, Sari, and thank you, Sebastian, for that informative webinar. At this time, we did want to open it up to questions to the audience. If you had a question for Sari or Sebastian, please go ahead and type it in your questions panel, and we will get to those in these last couple minutes here. We did have a few that came in throughout the webinar, so I'll go ahead and start with those. The first question actually goes to you, Sari, and it asks, what are the main advantages of using PAC-ML?
At the end of the day, the objective is to reduce the cost of the end user when they're building their production site. So the point here is to create common templates so that two machines that need to be connected look the same, even though they're built by different manufacturers and by using different PLCs. They still look the same, and it makes it easy for the system integrator to actually connect those two machines together and to improve the interoperability between them.
Terrific, thank you. And Sebastian, this question goes to you. What is the current status on the development of OPC UA TSN technology?
The OPC UA technology is fully available. It's implemented in many, many products, and you can buy it right off the shelf. The TSN technology, that is something which is still under development, where you will find in the test beds first prototype products that have the technology implemented. What we expect is that the TSN development and integration work will result in first products within 2018. So here you see, yes, it's still under development, but products are on its way.
Terrific. And sorry, this question goes to you. Where do we get more information about adapting PAC-ML?
I would probably start by going onto the OMAC website, omac.org, and you can actually download what's called a there's an implementation guide that you can download, and the implementation guide basically talks about the technology. You have to register to download it, but I believe the download is free.
Great, thank you. Sebastian, this question is for you. Is OPC UA TSN another field bus?
To make it very short, no, it's much, much more. As said, it provides information instead of just data. Data is provided maybe by some field buses, but information is only provided by OPC UA. It fully includes a security or many security mechanisms. So that's also something that standard field buses don't bring along. And already those 2 points give it a big advantage. And the third, but also very important one, is that it's 100% open technology that is not proprietary, implemented by any company in the market.
Terrific. Another question comes in from David, and it asks, who are the major driving companies behind this technology?
In general, you could say the automation market. Companies such as Bosch Rexroth, Schneider Electric, B&R, Siemens is strongly driving. We saw Mitsubishi Electric, National Instruments, but also the IT companies, Cisco, who else? Belden Hirschmann, Microsoft, and so on. So there are many companies driving this whole thing forward, which is required really to have a standard. A standard only makes sense if everybody supports it in the same way, and that's why there are so many companies driving the technology forward.
Terrific. And this is, I think, a follow-up question too. Another audience member asked, it took quite a few years for machine builders to replace Ethernet. Do you expect similar acceptance cycle with OPC UA TSN, or do you think the perception on the market today is different?
In general, the whole world is spinning much, much faster than 15 or 20 years back. So definitely we expect faster acceptance by the market and implementation by the market. But nevertheless, of course, by now we have a big installed base, which will still be there, but which will be included by migration strategies into the new world.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. And again, if we didn't get to your question during this webinar, we will follow up via email, so keep them coming. This question comes in from Damon that asks, will OPC UA with TSN replace PowerLink, EtherCAT, Profinet, or Ethernet IO?
I mean, all those protocols mentioned have a broad installed base in the field, so it would be wrong to say that it replaces them from today on and tomorrow we only have OPC UA TSN. But definitely, the way the technology OPC UA TSN looks right now, there are overlapping areas, overlapping applications where you can use either or. Where you can use a Profinet or a OPC UA TSN, and then it's the decision of the customer whether they want to use a most likely proprietary standard or if they go with the open one that everybody talks. So it fully depends on what the customer requires, and therefore definitely we think the overlap will be quite big of the technologies.
Great, thank you. And thanks for the audience for some great questions. Again, if we didn't get to your question today, we will follow up via email. I, of course, want to thank Sari and Sebastian, our webinar participants, and our sponsor, B&R Industrial Automation. As a reminder, this webinar has been recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording within the next 24 hours. And I also wanted to mention to make sure to check out MCMA's next event. It's MCMA's Technical Conference held October 16th through the 18th in Minneapolis, Minnesota. This conference will include educational sessions and strategies for motion control, motors, and related automation technologies. It will provide you with practical how-to information that everyone from machine builders and integrators to engineers designing systems can take back and implement at your company. To register for this event, feel free to visit MCMA's website. And lastly, be sure to visit www.motioncontrolonline.org for more information about our webinars and what else is coming up. Thank you again for all of our participants, and we hope you have a great day.